Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction tech or weekly global Passive House showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How you going, Zach?
I'm well. How are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm free now. I'm out of home isolation.
Nice.
My COVID adventure was relatively short. Grateful to have recovered fairly quickly, and got a lot of emails to catch up on, a lot of work because I didn't really feel like doing a lot during last week. But there's a lot going on, lots to catch up with.
Oh, good luck with that.
Yeah. So had a great chat this week with a really awesome architect in Perth in Western Australia. But before we get into that, let's thank our sponsors.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything we do at the Accelerator, including the Passive House podcast, comes thanks to our sponsors. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks to our champion sponsors, Icon Windows and Doors, Proseco, and SIGA. And thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
So Ben Caine is an architect and a passive house designer based in Perth, and he was actually referred to me by a listener. And I know that some really good stuff is going on in Perth. We've had a few guests from that part of the world already, and I've spoken to a few designers, builders, and consultants from Western Australia. Ben is a person who has a passion, but also a knack for making good design look simple. He had an early career in the film industry, but then decided that he really wanted to do something that would make a difference to people's lives. So in his mid-20s, he went back to college to become an architect. He's made the most of this opportunity and taken out a few design awards, and has also been active in the local branch of the Australian Institute of Architects. In 2018, Ben qualified as a certified passive house designer, and during that same year, he founded Leanhaus, which is his design firm and has the goal of bringing high-performance homes to more than just the select few who can afford a luxury architecturally designed home. And so I think while some of his designs definitely look $1 million, Leanhaus is demonstrating that passive house can be practical, affordable, and also very appropriate for warm climates like Western Australia. So I hope you enjoy this. This is my conversation with Ben Caine of Leanhaus. Cool. Hey, well, thank you, Ben. It's great to meet up, and always a bit tricky with Perth. I always kind of forget the time difference there. It's pretty significant, 5-hour difference between Auckland here and Perth over there. So
I didn't realise you're in Auckland. I assumed you were on the East Coast.
Well, I can pretend to be Australian sometimes. I grew up in Adelaide, so I do
Right.
have
An
a
Australian
little bit
accent.
of yeah. Kiwis recognise me fairly quickly as a Aussie, but it kind of wavers a little bit.
Yeah, right.
But the thing that I like about doing this is that we have a lot of commonality with establishing Passive House in this part of the world, because it's still quite new, and it's really exciting to see what people like yourself are doing with a Australian, New Zealand, like a Pacific kind of vernacular of that style of design, and also facing some of the technical challenges of how do you build a passive house in a warm climate, which it'd be good to get to that. But before we jump into the details, let's by way of introduction, talk a bit about how you got into architecture in the first place.
Oh, well, that's actually a fairly long story. When I actually, my first passion was film, and I was a mad filmmaker through high school and university, and I did a film degree. And I actually packed my bags from Perth at the age of 20 and moved to Sydney in pursuit of a career in the film business. And I worked in advertising, and that was my sort of opportunity to step up into film. And I ended up working in feature films at Fox Studios in Sydney.
Awesome.
So my way in was really visual effects, digital visual effects, and I was a producer and coordinator of effects for big Hollywood movies, as well as lower budget Australian films, and that was a really interesting time, because I basically won the lotto and managed to carve a career out in a very competitive field. But what I found was that the more I wanted to pursue the career, I found that I was less creatively challenged. And then I was also realized that I wasn't totally, besotted by the projects I was doing, even if they were big Hollywood movies with a huge, team. Quite often you'd work on something for a year and realize it was actually, straight to DVD.
Right. Yeah.
So, something you put your heart and soul into and work 6 days a week, and it basically has no impact on anybody anywhere.
Right.
And I just, architecture was something that always appealed to me. And it was a case of, well, I like the creativity, I like the science. I just want to start creating stuff that's tangible, that's actually useful, rather than, has the risk of being, forgotten.
Yeah.
So I felt it was important to have a professional qualification, and I really wanted to be challenged at this point. I was probably in my mid-20s, and I really wanted to do something that was hard, and I couldn't think of anything else. So architecture felt like the right step for me.
Wow.
And it basically ticked all the boxes, except perhaps the one which is, providing a secure and stable, income.
Well, and particularly for the time that it takes to become that professional, because I mean, for a mid-20s, people are sort of getting established in a career, getting experience, and to step away from that and jump back into being a student again for a considerable amount of time. Was it 5?
Well, it was 5 years. So, I mean, it was, I moved back to Perth to become a student again. By then I had my girlfriend, who's now my wife. I was married, as a second year student. We had a child when I was a third year student, and we were living on nothing.
Yeah.
And all my friends were buying houses and, getting established in their careers at the age of 30 or 31. And so we were well behind. In many ways, I feel like we were sort of 10 years behind where we should have been, I guess, career-wise. So it really pushed me hard to find a way, number one, to make a living in the business, and number two, to work hard to put myself in the right places to learn as much as possible.
Do you feel like that creative experience and that time working in the film industry has added to you as an architect?
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, the interesting thing about those films, I mean, I worked on like Moulin Rouge and the Matrix sequels and, you know, a whole raft of other projects, and they have enormous teams of specialists. So you
Mm.
have an art director who's, you know, the head of an art department. You have a cinematographer who's the head of the cinematography, you know, camera department, the costumer, props, visual effects. You know, there's all these heads of department, and they're all specialists, and they all have, you know, really highly trained, skilled people working with them. And if you think of the director of a film as being like the architect, who is
Mm.
coordinating and briefing and honing all these various skill sets to reach a singular vision. And that's really the skill of the director. And in many ways, the skill of the architect is also to bring in all those, you know, all the people who bring expertise to a project. And it could be, you know, interiors, it could be the site, building science, it could be the construction aspect, you know, right down to the trade level. You know, how does a, you know, carpenter want to detail a particular junction, or, you know, how to lay out tiles a particular way, or, you know, lighting, inside, outside lighting, you name it. So as an architect, you can't be expected to be an expert in all things. But if you reach out and form a team of people around you who can contribute to that and help sort of guide the vision, you can, I think, get a much better result. So yeah, I really feel that there's a similarity between movie directors and architects for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think that's a really important lesson to know where your expertise lay and your role in coordinating those other specialists. You mentioned that you outsource some of the drafting work at your practice.
Yeah.
And I think you have do you have someone else looking at sort of the interior?
Yeah, I have an interior designer
styling.
now. Yeah. So that's you know, interior design, I have to be fair, it's not a passion of mine. I have my views, but it's definitely not a passion. I don't get worked up about furniture or, you know, tiles. I'm much more interested in the form of the building and how it operates and the envelope. So it makes sense to have someone who lives and breathes interiors on your team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I look at some of the images of Abbott House, which we'll talk about, I mean, the interiors look stunning. So clearly that strategy of bringing other people on to the team works well.
Yeah, well, in that instance, it was actually the client's own selected interiors. So I was the architect on the project, and I basically handed over the shell, you know, the design of the shell, and the client, you know, handpicked the designer that they wanted to use. And, you know, it was great to see that they were very much on point in terms of, you know, the thematic style of the building carried through the inside and also to the landscaping as well. And that's what gets a really good project, when everyone's, you know, working on the same vision.
Yeah. I want to jump back to just after your graduation. You were leading a design team for was it a competition, design competition for Toyota?
Yeah, that was my second job out of uni. The first job I had before that, I worked for one of the well-known design firms in Perth as a graduate, and I was thrown in the deep end there, working with one of the directors, designing a lot of big buildings, you know, high-rise and urban design projects and all that sort of stuff. So I had a real seat of the pants sort of experience there, and it sort of got to the point where, as a young man with a child and a wife, and I really had to...
Yeah, pressure's on.
Yeah, pressure's on. I really had to sort of, push myself. And then this opportunity came up with a small firm that was starting to win some regional work. And there they were thrown in as the wild card entrant in a limited competition. So 4 firms were invited. 3 of them were the top firms in Perth, and then there was us. We were sort of the wild card because of a personal relationship with the firm's owner.
Mm-hmm.
And so no one really expected us to do anything, or, you know, certainly not trump the name architects. But and then I guess I was given the job of coming up with a submission, probably on the basis that, you know, it probably wasn't going to amount to anything anyway.
Right.
Because, you know, the odds were very long on us succeeding. So I really threw everything I had at it, certainly a lot of the things I learnt earlier. And I think what came down to winning that job is that really understanding the brief and really interpreting that into a form that spoke to the client's brand and the client's aspirations, rather than trying to force a vision on them, to actually really get down to the nitty gritty and understand what it is Toyota wanted to stand for and how they wanted their building to operate. And I think the jury probably looked at it, point by point and thought, well, which project ticks the boxes for us? And our project came out on top. So that was great to be selected to design the project. And also it was at a time in the industry where there's really not a lot going on. A lot of the big firms were contracting.
Was this around 2000? Well, this post sort of recession.
It probably would have been about 2010.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah, so it was post-recession. There wasn't a lot of commercial work out there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And the big name firms were struggling and they were laying off people, and they really threw everything they had at winning this quite modest job, $10 million job.
Yeah.
So we won the job and saw it through to construction, and it actually picked up the top commercial award in Perth, and it also won the top overarching architecture award in Western Australia. So it was a big...
It must be very cool for there wouldn't be too many architecture graduates a couple of years out that end up being able to walk into a showroom that they were part of creating.
Yeah, it's
was it a showroom or
it's their head office. It's the head office. So they have all their office staff there. They do all the training. So they're training salespeople and service people. They have a lot of events there. So it's a big office, big multi-use sort of building.
And that was a Green Star project, right?
It was, yeah. So it was a certified Green Star project. I think we went for 6 stars. So we had to go through that whole process of, working with the Green Star consultants and mechanical engineers and sustainability experts, and really sort of packaging everything up into one project that made sense.
And was that new? Had you done?
I'd never done a Green Star project before, but because of the work I'd done previously, I was right on top of the research. Like I really knew where to look to figure out what would work, what would be viable, what to promote in the project, and I had a lot of ideas about how to make it more human-centric, and change behaviours, encouraging people to use stairs instead of lifts, and to operate windows, and to have energy monitoring that was right at front of face and front of mind, so people would know how to tune the building, like the occupants would be actively involved in tuning the building for comfort and for energy efficiency. Right. So it was, and we use software to do that. So there was just a lot there that we crammed into it. It was more than just add-ons. It was very much about how the people would use the space and enjoy it and operate it.
Yep. When did you first hear about Passive House?
It was actually the client on Abbott House who said that's what he wanted to do. He had sort of grand aspirations for creating something that was, of an international standard. Right. And then, obviously there was one already built in Perth, but it probably wasn't a great example. It was very expensive and it wasn't particularly attractive looking. The classic Passive House from, in Germany in a cold climate, it's got very small windows, very simple box shaped. It doesn't really gel with certainly the West Australian idea of inside-outside living and large windows and that sort of thing. So
40-degree summers and
that's right. Well, more than 40. Yeah,
15 hours of sunlight in the summer.
That's right. Yeah, it's a pretty warm climate. We get some heat waves that can last 8 or 9 days with not much breeze and get hot. You don't get a lot of temperature difference day to night. It's not like a tropical climate where it's just hot and stinky the whole time.
Yeah,
but it's more of a dry heat, and during a heat wave, we don't get a cooling breeze at night. So the temperature might go from, say, 40 down to, say, 30. Yeah. It's not huge, whereas our typical summer condition is hot, but you can almost count that by 12 o'clock or even late morning, you'll get a cooling sea breeze arriving.
Yep.
It's just when you get those really extreme heat events that the sea breeze doesn't come in, it gets blocked by a very strong warm easterly and it just never arrives.
Yeah.
And if you get 5 or 6 days of that in a row, there's probably no building in Perth that can really, defend against that.
No, and I've lived through a few of those in Adelaide as well, and it's the same thing. I mean, the great thing about Adelaide is you know what the weather's going to be because you look at Perth, and that's the weather in 2 days' time.
Right, I didn't know that.
Because there's nothing between Perth and Adelaide apart from the desert.
Yeah.
And you'd quite often have those periods of time where exactly that would happen. It would be 40 degrees, and then it would cool down to relatively cool to 30 Celsius overnight, and that's not enough to.
Well, I think what typically happens with the brick houses they've built here is that once the heat gets in the house, even though it's 30 degree outside overnight, the house itself inside might still be up in the mid-30s.
Yeah,
because there's so much heat radiating back into the house through the brickwork and through the mass of the building, and so it's the housing here really isn't great for our climate.
No, and our place had a flat roof as well, so it was basically a brick walls with a tin lid on it.
Yeah.
So, sitting out in the sun, and not a lot of insulation, and single glazed windows, pretty leaky, but that didn't really contribute to anything. So this is sort of 10 or so years, decade into your new career as an architect. So you've had a bit of practice at doing kind of regular architecture. What was do you remember what your first impression was when you heard about this crazy German concept with airtight buildings?
Look, I think you've got to be realistic in that the path to passive house is really a journey. It's not a eureka moment. It's something where you go, oh, well, double glazing, that makes sense. How about I just put double glazing in a normal building?
Uh-huh.
And then someone says, no, it doesn't work like that. You don't just upgrade one aspect. You don't just pick and choose what you want. You've got to look at the whole system. And then you go away and you think, but that's too complicated. It's too hard, too expensive. No one will know how to build it that way. And then you think, and then you look at the heat recovery ventilation. You think, well, that makes a lot of sense because we've all, suffered a smelly, musty house before. And you think, well, wouldn't it be nice to have fresh air when you want to lock the house down and keep it warm? So that makes sense. But then someone says, well, no, that's only going to work if you make it airtight. But, and so you just end up going around and around and around through this process. And eventually you go, well, it's a whole system. You can't just pick and choose what you want. And I think that heat recovery ventilation people in Perth are probably sick of people contacting them saying, can we buy one of your units and put it on our house? Because these people just don't understand that it's a whole system and the house is completely ill-suited to that system.
Yeah.
So, it really took me perhaps a couple of years and certainly by the time the house was finished and then experiencing it for myself is what really sold it for me. And by then we'd figured out how to actually build the house cost effectively and, which membranes to use and how to detail it and all the considerations that go into it. So there was a big learning curve, but the end result was a house that basically proved the concept. It was a proof of concept. And being able to create something that was both proof of concept and, aspirational looking, it's an interesting looking home. It's very modern. It's photographs well. So so that sort of thing really helps people along and makes them go, oh, hang on a second, that's possible. And it doesn't have to look like a German box. It can be for our way of life, and it can be attractive, and it can be simple, and so as a matter of packaging up all those different elements, the construction technique, the the design, the architecture, the functionality, and then trying to also figure out how to deliver this product in a cost-effective way for ordinary people.
So you had you were the architect on the project. You had Claire Parry as the certifier.
That's correct. Yeah.
Were you involved with the modelling
No,
at all?
my main concern was to get to design the most efficient building envelope possible on a very difficult site.
Yep.
Yeah.
And did you have some other collaborations with suppliers and the builder?
Yes. Yeah.
Any sort of, what were the trickiest moments on the project? What were the hardest parts of the build?
Well, it's a pretty simple build. I mean, we make the decision to work with timber because it's quite, common. It's a common sort of trade that's available to do it. It really comes, the devil is in the detail in how to incorporate services and air tightness layers. The structure itself with all of my homes is quite simple. I don't think it's anything you could patent. It's just a case of the combined knowledge of all the team members, all the tradesmen, so that people aren't poking holes in the walls and doing business as usual, and they're taking care to place insulation so that there's no gaps, and carefully taping and sealing any penetrations in membranes and all that sort of stuff. So it's not just the designer, it's the whole delivery model from start to finish. It's everybody, the mindset of the builder, the mindset of the trades they engage.
Yeah,
it's everything. And then when the client goes to occupy the house, they have to understand what they're dealing with here, and in terms of how to operate the home to provide them with the highest level of comfort.
but this one was driven by the client, was it?
It was, that particular house was.
So they knew that they wanted a passive house.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how he wouldn't have seen one before, so
Right.
it would have been a test for him as well.
Yeah. Well, there weren't too many to go and have a look at in Perth at that time.
No, not at all. Yeah. So it's a tough one.
But Perth has become a little bit of a hub, along with Tasmania, for having a good number of passive houses, whether certified or not. There seems to be, I don't know whether it's people like yourself, there just seems to be a bit of a collection of passive house of people there creating a bit of activity.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually looked to see how it compares to the eastern states. We do have a more temperate, colder climate in the southwest, and I think there's been a bit of activity down there. I think what my business has tapped into is perhaps less about the passive house and more about the fact that the homes are inherently efficient,
Right.
and efficient in the design, efficient in the construction. They're efficient cost-wise for the quality of build that you're getting. And, hence the name Leanhaus, it's lean. The leanness is in every aspect of those homes from start to finish. We look really carefully at the structure. We eliminate steel wherever possible. I don't think any of the houses built to date since the business was started have any structural steel in them, which is really unusual for the way people build here.
Yeah.
So, and people want quality housing, and they want really functional housing, and they don't want it necessarily to be ostentatious or experimental. They just want the same way people maybe aspire to owning a Tesla. It's a very simple looking, functional, energy efficient car, right? And that's, in many ways, that's what housing should be. It doesn't have to be, the cover of a magazine because of experimental materials used or experimental detailing or super high-end interiors. People just want housing that works and is, and meets their budget. And that's sadly sort of lacking.
Absolutely. I think what you've done with this house, though, is, I mean, this is cover of magazine material. The house from the street, it looks like $1 million, but it looks like an architecturally designed high-end home. And there's almost a disconnect. I love the fact that you've put so much detail on your project profile on your website. People actually look at the floor plan. It's almost a disconnect between the look of the house and the ins and outs and the design details on the facade with such a basic, it's almost a classic passive house box
Yeah.
of a floor plan. and you can see how that there is that simplicity from an aerial view. But I guess the trick is it looks simple, but I imagine that a lot of really good thought has gone into that layout.
Well, it's like everything. It's quite often you see designers and architects trying to make a project special by doing odd shapes and angles and things like that. Now, whether you appreciate those shapes and angles from the outside of the building or from inside the building is another matter. But the reality is that to do something really elegantly simple takes work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of refinement and a lot of work and a lot of care that goes into extracting the most functionality from the smallest space.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a 400 square metre house or a 120 square metre house. You can create more value by being super careful, super considered with how you carve up space and how spaces are connected. So that's something I take a lot of pride in, and I'm not trying to win any awards by having the fanciest shaped house. If I can do a rectangle, I'll do a rectangle every day of the week.
Well, I think you have done a rectangle, but it doesn't look like that from the street because of just the style and some little tricks. And I think you're right. That's so true that making something look simple is the kind of the art of a true craftsperson in learning and mastering their art, really, which is, I think, what you've managed to accomplish with this. Is there monitoring, and do you know how well it's performing?
Yeah, there's monitoring in all the houses. The one thing we did discover is the passive house concept works particularly well in the colder climate.
Yep.
Because you don't need to add any additional heat to have a high level of comfort. Perth, we have pretty cold winters. Like we can get temperatures down to zero.
Yep.
And for houses that are designed to operate at 25 degrees, zero is very uncomfortable because it basically means that most houses' default level is probably well below 20 in winter, which, 16 or I've lived in houses where it gets down to 14 or 12 degrees inside over winter.
Yeah.
Whereas the passive house concept for winter in Perth, very comfortable. So all those winter months, there's no additional heat required to basically walk around with a T-shirt on internally, which is amazing because heating a house is, the most energy hungry mode for it to be in.
Still in Perth, where you've got those really hot summers.
Yes, but with the cold winters,
your energy requirements still winter.
Your energy requirement to heat a house is greater than the energy requirement to cool a house.
Yeah.
So it seems very well suited to the winter mode. The issue is really the heat gain in summer, and I found since this project that it's basically a requirement to have an air conditioning option.
Yeah.
Because looking at the science of phase shift, which is the time it takes for temperature change to occur from outside to inside, it's very difficult to come up with a wall system that's both cost effective and effective at slowing down the heat gain from outside to inside long enough to buffer you against extreme heat.
Well, especially as we were talking about before, that could be multiple days in a row.
Well, that's the problem. And even if you create a great wall system, you might have, say, an 8-hour phase shift. So if the peak of the heat's at, say, 12 o'clock during the day, and then that heat has travelled through the wall and arrives at, say, 8 p.m., if the outside temperature hasn't really dropped much below 30 degrees at 8 p.m., you're not really doing a lot to improve the long-term comfort of the home.
Yeah.
You sort of get to a point where it doesn't really matter. I mean, you could build a rammed earth house with 600 millimetre thick walls.
Yeah.
And eventually that heat will travel through that mass and then arrive to the inside of the house.
Yeah.
So there's, other than living in a cave underground, there's not a lot you can do to combat those hot conditions. But it's the blessing is that with our hot, sunny summers, you can very cost effectively have a small air conditioning unit coupled with photovoltaic, panels on the roof, and you can run that air conditioner for free and maintain a constant, say 24 degrees or 22 degrees inside, and just have the air conditioner set to your comfort level, and it just does its job for free.
Because I guess even in those, if you have those series of warm days with warm nights, even your ventilation system running on a nighttime bypass is really not going to do anything for you, is it?
No,
it's going to bring in 30 degrees temperature from the outside.
Yeah, it's not enough. It's not enough of a difference. Yeah, I mean, so we build a wall systems to slow down that heat gain as much as is practical from a cost point of view. Mm-hmm. But at some point, the air conditioning is going to become handy.
Yeah.
So, and it really is just the most cost-effective way of giving the occupants of the home the comfort level that they choose to have.
Do you see this as repeatable? As what's the scope for this type of design across Perth, but maybe even across southern Australia?
I think you can't remove the expert element from the execution of each individual home. The reason is that every block is different. Every site condition is different. Every council has different planning regime. So unless you're just building a repeatable home on, say, rural lots where there's no constraints, every home is a unique home, and it needs to be designed and it needs to be detailed, and you need to go through the procurement process with the builder, and those builders and that team needs to be on board with the standard you're trying to achieve and how to achieve that. So it's a tough one in terms of being repeatable. I don't know if the project home industry will ever get to the point where their trades and contractors are skilled or paid enough to follow through and actually deliver it. And similarly, like I said, if you picked up, there's a lot of care that needs to go into the design to actually make it work and energy efficient. And when that design phase is given to someone who doesn't have the understanding or the care or the talent or the experience, then it's a pretty crucial part of the puzzle that's missing from the delivery of that home. So I would like it to be a lot more repeatable, because I would like a lot more people to have access to this. And that's part of what we're trying to do as a business, is find ways of streamlining every step so that more and more people can have it. If we can make the design process quicker, if we can make the procurement process less, require less time and be less selective about who's working on the home, and if you can do all of these different things, then you may just end up shaving away some of the barriers to delivering these homes for more people.
Yep. Where would you like to see the Australian architecture and residential building industry be in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
It's 3 to 5 years is pretty short term, because realistically, like the client that approaches me today, they might be only just moving into their new home in 3 years' time.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty short time frame to be projecting. I've been in business for 3 and a bit years now, and we've only delivered the five homes, I think it is. So it's not it's a very slow process.
Yeah.
But I would really like to see the architecture, and in many ways also the designer home industry, move away from this wastefulness and extravagance that you see. Wasteful of people's time in terms of complexity, in terms of materials, oversized homes, using the wrong sorts of materials.
Yep.
Sometimes I follow a lot of people on Instagram, and sometimes you might see a designer, an architect you admire, and they've posted videos of a slab being poured, and they boast, oh, this slab's got 8 tons of steel in it, and it took 300 cubic meters or whatever. I'm like, why would you boast about that? Why would you? Why? What's happening inside your head that you think that's an achievement? It's an achievement because you're using more of the Earth's resources than should reasonably be used on a single home.
It sounds impressive, but it's actually quite scary.
So the skill is really is reduction. If you can prove or say that you've completely eliminated concrete from this house, or completely eliminated steel from this house, or you've built it entirely out of sustainable and renewable sources that can be recycled at the end of life, and the house uses an exceptionally low amount of electricity, and it's going to be suitable for multiple different types of family types, over the life of it, so it doesn't get knocked over in 20 years because it's not suitable for the next occupant. So that's the sort of stuff that I would like to see people boasting about online, but it's just perhaps not as sexy as a huge concrete cantilever.
Well, maybe in this audience, you might have found the right tribe here. That I find that stuff pretty appealing, and I think others will too. It's a great vision. That's very, very cool. Hey, well, thank you, Ben, and well done. I mean, it's a fantastic project. It's not a small thing to get a project like that certified. As one of the early adopters, trailblazers, I know the challenges of doing that. It's not just the very first project. The handful that follow on behind that have still got to break some barriers and find, you're dealing with tradespeople, builders who will have never had to deal with air tightness before, or all the other concepts you're dealing with. So it's no small feat. So well done, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's a lot of fun, and it's nice to know that we're making a change in a small way that hopefully people can be inspired by.
Absolutely you are. All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Great. And that was Ben Caine. He lives just outside of central Perth in Western Australia, where it does get pretty warm. I always forget, but I should have mentioned at the intro there, we're talking in Celsius, as we do in most of the rest of the world. So 40 degrees. What's that?
We did the calculation. It's 104 Fahrenheit, which is hella hot.
That is pretty warm, and I've experienced temperatures like that growing up in Adelaide, and I always thought that above sort of 35 degrees Celsius, it kind of doesn't matter anymore. It's just uncomfortable, and you just try and stay inside in somewhere air conditioned, and if you have to go somewhere, you sort of jump into the car, put the air conditioning on, and move to the next place, hoping that it's cool. But that's not the worst of it. As Ben pointed out, I think that the hardest part of summer is when it stays above 30 degrees Celsius as a minimum, which is around 86 Fahrenheit. So you're going from those above 100 degrees Fahrenheit max, day temperatures, but not going down below mid-80s during the night. That's when it gets really uncomfortable, because it can do that for 5 days straight. And then if you've got a heavy building, lots of concrete brick, not very well insulated, lots of glass, lots of especially westerly facing glazing, which you can totally easily do legally. There's nothing in the building code to stop that from happening in that part of the world. That can just become really, really uncomfortable and super energy efficient, because the only way really of dealing with that, and the accepted way of dealing with it, is just to smack in a big air conditioning unit. Yeah.
I mean, when you both were describing the brick kind of vernacular or whatever convention of building there, it just sounded like, and you were talking about your old house in Adelaide with the tin roof. or a tin lid. It just sounded like there were a bunch of pizza ovens being created there. It was just with these temperatures.
All powered pizza ovens.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
sun powered ones.
Yeah, it sounded pretty brutal. In terms of just weathering those heat waves, and really interesting conversation too about and so in those conditions, no matter how good the envelope is, at some point that heat is going to get through if there's no way to cool, and if it's only getting down to 86 at night, it's never cooling. So I think that was a really interesting conversation about kind of his insights around how to design in this, for those conditions, and thinking about how to tweak what the passive house design approach that one might have in a more kind of temperate climate during the summer.
So certainly the design approach and the aspects of the details, like external shading, minimizing the windows, not having windows facing west as much as, especially as we kind of know about facing the equator, but some of that westerly facing glazing really catches people out. But I think the other thing is the philosophy and being okay with appropriately sized air conditioning, and the reality that we are going to need air conditioning in some passive houses to keep cool, because I think just from physics, you can keep something, you can get enough solar gain in a very cold environment from a little bit of sun and making the most of that incoming energy. But it's much harder to limit the amount of energy coming in and actually lose energy, which is essentially what you're trying to do when you are cooling. You're trying to extract energy out of that system and cool it down. And you can't, there's a limit to how much you can do that passively or not actively with mechanical cooling. And that's okay. I think Ben made that point, that as passive house people, we have to realize that it's okay to do that. We're not going to the dark side by putting an air conditioning system on a building, particularly if you design the envelope to make the most efficient use of that already efficient appliance. I mean, air conditioning systems are amazing, thanks to all the physics that goes on inside them. But if you couple that with appropriately sized photovoltaics or renewables, you can actually still have essentially a really good closed system, and you can get into the sort of embodied carbon issues and all that sort of stuff as well. But it doesn't. The main point is it's not all bad to have a appropriately sized air conditioning system on a passive house.
Right. You still have a good envelope. You're making sure that there's good comfort and good indoor air quality and all of those benefits, and you're just adding a little cooling to make it work. And happily that happens when there's lots of solar energy available to create solar energy on the roof. So and that, I think, that's also a point that Daniel Kress has pointed out on the podcast before. And I know that Graham Wright of FIAS recently wrote about this kind of that a philosophy that you're describing toward passive house in these hot climates during the summer. Yeah,
of course it always has got to be envelope first and efficiency first. So we're not saying that is start with the air conditioning in mind at the beginning, but just don't feel bad about needing it in some of these climates. And I guess this is going to become, as said to Ben, this is going to become not just a Perth or an Australian issue. This is going to become more of an issue elsewhere. And I know that people are starting to use future climate files, which is a good thing to do, because averages are going to change. They're changing already. So if you're designing on the expected summer peaks based on historical averages, then you're not really doing appropriate future design.
Yeah.
You need to be looking at predicting temperatures 1-2 degrees hotter and for longer than what they have been historically.
I'm in Seattle. We've, historically have not needed air conditioning at all, but it's becoming more common, of course. And we had that crazy 14 degree Fahrenheit. What is that? 45, 46 Celsius, something like that.
It's getting up there.
Yeah. Listen to me making these conversions so quickly. Who knows if it's right, but super hot. And
super hot.
Yeah. Ridiculous. I mean, like completely unprecedented and unheard of. And then last week, Antarctica spiked, I think 38 C, something like that.
Above, it was near
normal.
40 degrees above what it should be. It's still -10.
Right, it's still cold. That's good, but I can't that would not be good news if that kind of spike happened. When if and when that starts happening elsewhere, other than the poles, it is scary stuff. So we definitely need that. And I guess the other thing that's handy is heat pumps. Can go both directions. Heat and cool. So this goes hand in hand with this move toward electrification as well.
It does, and that's a good point, because as Ben pointed out as well, that the it's still a majority heating climate. So even though you remember those heat waves because they're unbearably uncomfortable if you can't get out of them, but it's still the length of winter, and if you add up all the heating degree days or heating degree hours, you still end up using more to stay warm. You require more energy to stay warm than you do to stay cool, even in places like Perth, Adelaide, Sydney. So you still got to design for that, and that comes back to the envelope efficiency first, which is what I wanted to focus more on, really, because that is the what Ben does so well is that envelope and making it look so amazing, so really contemporary, clean, quite high. They look really high end, particularly the Abbott House, which is profiled on his website. But I'm just struck by that floor plan, which is quite a simplistic design.
Yeah, whenever I see designers that have this capacity to do that elegant simplicity, I'm reminded that I really wish there were a word I'm sure there's a German word for this, but I wish there were a word in English for elegant simplicity, because it's so special in design. It's so it's so powerful. It really is I think an ideal that so many aspire to in practice, and for good reason. So that notion that he makes good design look simple, but he's making simple design look good, right? I mean, the word simple just doesn't do justice to kind of the
elegance. Is a much better word. It reminds me of that the phrase, and I can't remember who it's attributed to, but sorry, this is such a long letter. Right. I didn't have time to write a short one.
I think maybe it's Mark Twain. Yeah, but right.
It's the Mark Twain equivalent of architecture. Mm-hmm. Like a big house, you almost have to be apologetic for. Sorry, I didn't have time to design you a smaller, more compact one.
Right. That actually uses space well.
I'm lazy, so I just added on more space to make it work. Where the craft of a good architect, I think, is to make something that looks amazing, has amazing function, and performs well in a compact design that looks simple, but the simplicity is not in the craft or the quality of the design. And you see this in just good design principles in any sort of product as well. That often things look simple, but they're actually a lot of thought's gone into making them look simple.
Yeah. Yeah, and the elegance also kind of sounds frou-frou, which isn't what this is about, right? We need a word. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Anyway, So really exciting stuff. And as I've said before, I really like seeing this this style emerge of how Passive House looks good, is doing performance really well. But we didn't really go into it much, but I know that Ben is also really conscious of decarbonizing his material selection. So all really, really good stuff.
Yeah.
But bringing it into these warm environments, other places outside of Europe and North America. So really, really exciting to see, and I think inspiring for the rest of the industry.
Yes. I loved his emphasis also on cutting out waste and extravagance, which is, I think, totally in line with this idea of elegance, simplicity, and design, but also with sustainability in design and minimizing resource use and embodied carbon impacts, all that. Really good stuff.
Totally. Awesome. All right. What have we got coming up?
This week we have a really fun episode of the Passive House Accelerator live show. It's a project showcase featuring the Catskill project, which is a decarbonized single-family development in rural New York. And it's going to feature speakers Buck Moorhead of Buck Moorhead Architecture, Greg Hale of Regen Associates. Greg is also a leader at NYSERDA, and Laura Carter, also of Buck Moorhead Architects. And they're going to be talking about this cool project with prefab solutions to single, net zero or zero carbon, and well, probably zero energy at this point, but really ambitious sustainability goals for a pre-existing development. So they're taking what could have been just your standard wasteful and extravagant single-family homes in the woods, and turning that instead into an exemplar of high-performance building and great design and prefabrication. So that's going to be really fun. I also want to announce that we have a new team member at Passive House Accelerator. Kim Davis is our new project coordinator and online community manager. She just started this week, and it's been really fun to work with her already and to get to know her. So maybe we'll have a chance to hear from her on the podcast at some point, or definitely see her at events that we're holding at the Accelerator. And then there's tons of other stuff going on by all sorts of great Passive House and high performance building organizations. And we will include a link to our listing of what's going on in show notes.
Awesome. As always, lots of activities going on, and don't forget you can get in touch with us. We'd love to get your thoughts, comments, feedback about this or anything else that's going on over the Accelerator. But specifically about the podcast, you can email our podcast at passivehouseaccelerator.com. I think that does it for this week, Zach.
I think so. Thanks so much. That was a great interview, Matthew. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. We'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast.